Hey guys, so today I wanted to pose a question to you all. What is a fair Yu-Gi-Oh deck? What does that mean? Several months back I made a video about, the problem with Yu-Gi-Oh fun decks because it's a term that you kind of hear thrown around a lot where people are like, "Oh, I'm building a fun deck, this deck's just for fun." And then like at one of my local card shops, they did a fun deck tournament where they had this ban list that said like, "Okay, you can't play these certain strategies, these certain cards, these certain decks are all banned. You can't play these." And there was a bit of strife around that because it's like, oh, well, like, how come my deck is on that list? It's not even like a top tier deck. Like, one of the examples for me was like, they said, like, you couldn't play Madolches in the Fun Deck tournament, which I like Madolches. I don't think that they're unfair, but like some other people do. But, so like, there's like back and forths with that. This is a similar question, which is, what makes a Yu-Gi-Oh deck fair? I see this a lot on Reddit and Discord. Join the Team APS Discord, by the way, link in the description. And Twitter and all that stuff where people are like, okay, this deck is fair, this deck is unfair. Certain archetypes are fair, certain ones are unfair. What makes an archetype fair, and at what point does an archetype or a strategy or whatever become unfair? So I think that the main thing people seem to cite is just, is it like pleasant, I guess is the best word I can say, to play against. So, like, for instance, I think people, on the whole, if I'm understanding it correctly, like decks that are flexible and can do a lot of things. People like decks that don't lock them out of the game. That is to say, like, if you play against it, its goal is to just, like, make a board that says you can't summon or you can't use monster effects, negates everything or whatever. People don't like that. And people also don't like decks that are overly defensive and like full of floodgates and those sorts of things. So that's like, I guess, the starting point here is just that we don't like decks that are unfun to play against. But that's also where our first problem comes in because that's highly subjective. What's unfun for me might not be unfun for you, and people draw those lines at different places. If we take maybe like those trap decks that everybody doesn't like Subterra Guru Control or Altergeist. For a long time, people would say those decks are unfair because they just run floodgates and they're slow and just arduous to fight. But people have like different opinions on them. I think like some people right now would say like Subterra Guru Control is more lame than Altergeist, for instance. I'm using lame as a term that I've heard people say. I'm not saying I think these decks are lame. That's what people say. But they're both like slower trap decks. So some people will say they're both lame, some people say only one's lame. Like, where's the line here? Or Paleozoics, that's another one that comes up a lot. And I remember like True Draco was one of those decks that like people thought was like really lame. But that's all subjective, and the same can be said of combo decks. Because the truth is, yeah, the big combo deck of the day, Dragon Link and stuff like that, those decks they're quite strong. Very strong. But most decks today have a combo. No matter what sort of lower or mid-tier deck you're playing, they have a combo. So, like Madolches from earlier. The Madolche deck has a pretty long extended combo that you can get just off of normal summoning Magdalene or just off of, opening with Petting Cessor, for instance. Big long combo. The board that it makes at the end isn't like necessarily as strong, but it's still like a 5-10 minute turn, and it can still set up a lot of disruptions. Is that like fair or like pleasant to play against? Depends on who you ask. What's another really good example? Phantom Knights. That's a deck. So Phantom Knights are similar to Madolches. They can make a board just the standard Phantom Knight combo can like make a board with Rusty Bardiche and like 2 Fog Blades. Just that's just the bare minimum is that, and that's a lot of negations. What is it? No, not Rusty Bardiche. It's the dragon that has 3 negations. What is it called? The dark one. You know what I'm talking about. That board with like Fog Blade set. You can negate lots of monster effects, but like Phantom Knights don't win tournaments really very often. They top here and there, and I would say that they're a fair deck. I mean, by today's standards. Another thing to keep in mind, though, I guess, is not just the subjectivity of that, but also like power creep plays a big role. The decks that were broken 5-6 years ago are like common today, like not broken at all. They're kind of just standard fare. Good example, Burning Abyss, right? Burning Abyss today has access to all of the cards, if I'm correct, that it had access to before, like in 2014, 2015 when it was like top tier. So, they've got 3 Graph, they've got 3, Scarm, they've got 3 Seer, they've got 3 Tour Guide. Like, all these cards, more or less are just, they're here, they're legal. But because the game has evolved and because power creep has, taken effect and, we've got more hand traps and just more ways of stopping things, decks like Burning Abyss or Necroz, that's another one from the same format, or Ritual Beast, like that was an offbeat one that was good back then, and it's gotten all its cards back, or ABCs, whatever. These decks aren't as good today as they were back then. So maybe in 2015 or something, you might say that these decks were unfair relative to the competition, but today they're quite fair, maybe even overly fair, overly balanced. So that's like a thing to sort of keep in mind. And then here's another thought that I have. By the way, if you can't tell, I'm just rambling. Like with many of these videos, I planned the topic, but not exactly how I get through it. So sorry if it feels like I'm just going all over the place. Here's another thing to consider about whether a deck is fair or not. It may not be like the individual cards or archetypes design, but just something that it's able to do externally. So for instance, let's take the Harpy Lady deck. That's one I've thought about a bit. Harpy Ladies, that's, your cards like Harpy Perfumer, Harpy Channeler, Harpy Dancer, like the Harpy Strategy. They are, what I would say, a pretty balanced deck. I mean, they got ways to summon more cards, and they can, pop some cards, search some cards, do some stuff, but nothing I would say is unreasonable, right? Like, not really. But they can make some more and make a barrier statue on turn 1. Is that fair? I mean, they went first, locked you out with a barrier statue. You can't play. You having fun still? Is it fair still? What about, these Harpy decks that just go second and they make Utopia double and they OTK you? What about that? I mean, yeah, there's counterplay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there isn't counterplay to these things. But is Harpies, or are Harpies, a fair deck now in your eyes if that's what they're doing? So in order for a Harpy deck to be fair, should it ignore those strategies? But the strategies exist. The cards are legal. Samora is legal. The barrier statue is legal. The Utopia double's legal. Not saying that one's not as bad. But you know what I mean? Like, those cards are legal and they can play them. So should they not play them if it's available to them? That's another one of those conversations that gets really tricky. I think of stuff like Dragon Link where, the Rocket archetype, I'd say, is rather fair. I think if you were to play a pure Rocket deck that's limited to only running Rocket monsters and spells and traps, then it's fair. But the moment you put in, Guard Dragons, Omni Dragon, Brotar, Starlead, Safer, Noctivision, Dragon, Chamber Dragon Maid, and just, Romulus, all these things, is it still fair? But it's not the Rockets that are unfair. So what is unfair? Is it Dragon Link? Is that combination of cards specifically done that way? That's unfair. Tough question. I don't know. So, that's just another one of those things that has to be considered is individual stuff might not be unfair, but hybrids might be a little less fair. And speaking of hybrids, what about something like Tri-Brigades? What about something like Dogmatica? What about something like Eldritch? A lot of these things on their own seem rather fair by today's standards. Maybe they'd be broken a few years ago, but fair by today's standards. But then when combined with other things, can get kind of nasty. Like Invoked plus Shadalls. That suddenly gets really annoying. Tri-Brigade plus Lyrilusk plus some more and barrier statues and stuff. That's unfair, but on its own, Tri-Brigade's not particularly awful. Eldritch alone, not too bad. Last year when it had Jet Synchron, that was pretty crazy. You see what I'm getting at here? It's hard to say what a fair deck is. I have some ideas of what I think are fair decks. Something that I'll always cite as decks that I think are exceptionally fair and very well designed. On average, there's 1 or 2 exceptions, are the deck builder packs. I think that, things like Rika, things like Witchcrafters, those are the 2 that I play, but really any of the deck builder archetypes, they tend to be quite fair. I'd say, on their own, Dragon Maids, fair. Mathmex, fair. Infinitrax, fair. Evil Eyes, fair. I would say that Adam Emancipators, even fair. But, and I think that within, compared to each other, they're also very fair. I'd say the newest ones, like Ogdoadic and all that stuff, or Xartic, they're fair decks. but sometimes they can combine with other things, and suddenly it gets less so. So, I don't know. I want to hear you guys' thoughts. I'm more so posing the question rather than having like a direct answer to it myself. What decks would you consider fair, and what are the parameters by which you measure a deck's fairness? Is it, relative to other decks in its field? Is it how it's, like what strategy it employs? Is it how pleasant or unpleasant it is to play against? Is it, a matter of staples? Does the deck suddenly get unfair when you get to throw in Nibiru and throw in Dark Ruler No More, and you're throwing in, like Lightning Storms, and even, like, is that, what makes a deck fair or unfair? Or an archetype fair or unfair? It's just a fluid thing, and it's a tough one to answer. I don't think there's like a perfect one, but that's what this video is here for. So let me know down in the comments. I'm interested in hearing. It's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.